I'm Stephanie Caballero, founder of the Surrogacy Law Center and IVF Parent, which is my new podcast, and of course, the Repro Law Roundup. This is for you. Please save your questions for later. I will answer them so you can put them in the chat. Also, I want to let you know that if you'd like to see me do a PowerPoint or something else or have a guest, let me know. I will do a PowerPoint. It will be more work for me, but it's okay. Yes, I do prep below because I have to be organized and figure out what I'm going to say, right? But just let me know what you want to see, right? I love doing this for you. I love telling you what's going on. So let's get started because I was late again. Maybe next month I'll figure it out. Gosh. Anyways, let's start at the top. Okay, so we have a date now for the birthright citizenship case, which I feel like we've been talking about for so long, even before Trump was president. Anyways, oral arguments are going to be April 1st. So I will talk about what happened during those in the April Repro Law Roundup, all right? So to give you some background, Trump issued his executive order on January 20th. It was supposed to go into effect February. It never did. There were a million cases against it. Okay, not a million, four, but that's a lot, right? And of course, they never went into effect because there was an injunction. There were 23 states, I think, that joined. And then, of course, Trump went to the Supreme Court and he said, you can't have an injunction that affects the whole United States unless all the states join in the case. And the Supreme Court said, you know, Trump, you're right. You can't have an injunction. It needs to be a class action. So what do? They just changed them to class actions and Trump lost all those cases again. All right. So now we've got the issue at hand, which is not an injunction, is can the people who are born in the United States, no matter where their parents are from, be United States citizens? That is what is currently in our country, all right? So I will know in April after the oral arguments, we'll kind of know how the justices are going to rule because their questions give them away, typically, right? So I will talk about that in April. I have to say, though, that there's been some legal analysis that has said that Trump will most likely lose, and he will lose his tariff case and all the big cases that he's brought before the Supreme Court because this is his second year, and he doesn't have political clout because he is a lame duck president. I know he's talked about running again, but the Constitution says he can't. Fingers crossed. So they say, typically, going all the way back to Biden, Trump won, Obama, Bush, blah, blah, blah. Second term presidents usually lose at the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court knows they're going to be gone. So we'll see what that happens, all right? But like I said, it'll be in April, and then June, July is when the justices will rule. They'll probably rule in the beginning of July because they save the best for last, and then they're gone, so they don't have to deal with the fallout. Clever of them, right? But there was a recent ruling for, not a million, for, and the fourth judge just ruled against him. And the judge really felt that they needed to, little dot the I and just really put an exclamation point on the fact that, yes, we have birthright citizenship. It is available to all people who are born in the United States, no matter where or how they got here, right? So that's what the case that ruled against him. It's the last one. So they just felt that they needed to block the enforcement of the executive order. So that's what's happened. All right. Now we move on to Florida. Last month I talked about Florida and a sperm donor case. There's lots coming out of Florida now. Oh my gosh, Florida, what the heck? So anyways, there was an IVF mix-up, and I'm going to talk about a kind of a happy ending to an IVF mix-up at the very end. It's very rare. Okay, I want to let you know. They have very strict procedures in place, they meaning IVF clinics, whose egg goes with what sperm, what embryo to what person, they really labs really, really try not to have this happen, but people are human. And the couple found out because the baby is a different race of theirs. They have bonded with this child, but they want to find out who the parents are. And it just appears that the clinic had no idea. So they sued the clinic, yeah, of course. And they're desperate to find out if somebody else has their child. I cannot imagine what they're going through. It has got to be so difficult. And I hope they have a good outcome as the story I'm going to tell you about. Um, but we'll have to wait and see. Interestingly, in the ruling, because the clinic wasn't the ones that notified them, or they weren't able to, it looks like, give them the answers they needed, like, oh, yes, this is how it happened. Oh my gosh, your embryos are safe, or your embryos went here, which, again, very rare, but could you imagine the stress this couple is going through? They are going to test every child's DNA for the past 5 years, and the clinic has agreed to this. I don't know if that's going to be something that is going to be standard in Florida, but we'll just have to wait and see what's going to come out of Florida. But, all my best to that couple. And, my Florida attorneys, if you're dealing with them, I just feel for them and all those affected by that clinic, right? And then something came out of Florida recently, and a lawmaker is amending the statute that has been on the books for, I want to say, longer than California's surrogacy statute. So I think 20, 15, 20 years. One of my Florida colleagues can help me out and tell me. So they are rewriting it to ban international intended parents, as well as to make it very restrictive and to allow, these are proposed, hasn't happened yet, and to allow the surrogate to change her mind. They're basing it on adoption principles, not really understanding surrogacy. And then the Attorney General actually went after a French couple and in the Supreme Court, just right to the top, right? And is saying that what they did, the French couple, they entered into a surrogacy contract, and the Attorney General is arguing that treats the child like chattel. And he argues it violates the 13th Amendment against slavery. Clearly, the Attorney General does not understand that surrogacy is not slavery. Women are not forced in the United States to become surrogates. They are volunteers. They come forward freely. They have medical evaluations. They meet with a psychologist. They have an attorney, her own representation. Really, she's volunteering. So obviously, the Attorney General doesn't understand surrogacy, and the response from the French couple is basically, well, it's also a moot point. Our baby was born in November of 2025. We came back to France, and in France, they can and they did go through an adoption process, this same-sex married couple. So not only were they declared the parents by a judgment in Florida, they now have an adoption in France. So it's called a moot point, meaning it's done, it's over. I mean, what are you arguing about? So they have filed a motion to dismiss. They also say you didn't go through state court. You just went right to the Supreme Court. Usually you don't do that, even, right? You've got to, if it starts in federal, then you got to appeal it. Then you go to the Supreme Court of the United States. You start in state court, you appeal it to the federal state court. There's a process, right? Lack of standing, so we'll see where this goes, this case. But this case is also because of the amendments to the Florida surrogacy law. So what I've advised all my agencies is, and what agencies and IVF clinics are really doing, which is so unfortunate, we are pausing right now. I have a surrogacy coordinator who has 4 matches right now. I've talked to one of the intended parents, and I said, listen, so I'm going to tell you this right now. their legislative session ends in March. I think it's the 13th or the 15th. So I'll schedule my repro law roundup after that date, right? So I can talk about this. It hasn't gone out of committee. In the United States, it has to go through committee, right? So it hasn't moved. All the attorneys in Florida, oh my gosh, they've been amazing. They have boots on the ground. These two cases I talked about have been filed. The response, representing the French intended parents, has been filed and worked on. They've got a lobbyist because you need a lobbyist to help you fight, and the proposed legislation. So also, there is no stakeholder. In the United States, you need stakeholders. You need people with money typically behind your proposed amendments. So currently, there are no stakeholders. Hopefully, that stays that way and that it just dies because it has to make it through this session. And there's lots going on in Florida. The governor is leaving. So hopefully, it dies. And then people with calmer heads that actually know about surrogacy can redraft the legislation and give proposed legislation that is reasonable and factual and based on, studies, right? So I'll keep you posted in that, and we'll see what happens. But hopefully, Florida remains the great state for surrogacy that it currently is, and it remains that way. All right. And then there's been a case that got recently approved in Florida. It's a Florida company that has a very well-known surrogacy agency that operates in Mexico. And there's a couple from Nevada because they recently went to the newspaper. They have been all over Facebook. They've been all over social media, blasting the agency in a very negative way. And the agency actually in federal court, the justice or the judge, not the justice, approved their defamation lawsuit. And that's a big deal because I've been in federal court before, and federal court is not easy to get your case through. But this agency did. So we'll see where that goes. I know a recently agency that got really unfairly blasted by a former client, and everything got taken down and they won. So, like I said, we'll see where this goes, but lots is happening out of Florida. Oh my gosh, it must be the weather. I hear it's very cold there. When Florida gets a cold, the whole country sneezes. So maybe they got a cold. Who knows? But things need to calm down. That's all I have to say. And then staying in the United States, Utah recently proposed legislation just like Florida. It's a Safe Kids Act. Really, what it is it's banning Chinese nationals from utilizing surrogacy in the United States. Again, if it's just like Florida, there are no stakeholders, meaning no political action committees, no groups behind it with money to support it. So hopefully, just like the SAFE Act in Florida, it's all performative. If you know anything about politics, a lot of it is like theater, right? So all the world's a stage. So we'll see where that goes. I'll be following it and see if it goes any farther. But so far, nothing has happened. And I think with all that said, the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, which is where all the United States IVF physicians as well as international IVF physicians, they are members. They get together annually. And they have a scientific congress. So they really meet. There's mental health groups. There's a legal professional group. I was a chair of that at one time. So they have that. They have, definitely many, many, programs and meetings all the time, but they have their big one once a year. All right. So they had a policy on gestational carriers in the United States, and it was very comprehensive. And what they talked about was that these are utilized by gestational carriers, and we need to really focus on policy and facts. They said that there's no federal law, it's state law, but state law is typically very robust. And they actually said that most of the people that utilize surrogacy have a need. Obviously, there are male same-sex couples, but you could argue they have a need too. They don't have a uterus. However, there are women who are born without a uterus, or they have a medical condition, a psychological condition. I needed a surrogate, and I looked like I should be able to carry, right? So they said, despite all the media visibility, which is a little too high right now, in my opinion, but there's only 13.7, sorry, it's ASRM, they're very accurate people. 13.7 pregnancies per 100,000 deliveries. They have seen an increase, but still very low. Most of it, like I said, is a medical necessity. There is no federal law, but it's state driven. And the states like Michigan and California and Nevada and Colorado and Texas, they have very, very good laws regarding surrogacy. Separate legal representation. Some of them even include, mental health for the surrogate, mental health for the intended parent. So really, what ASRM is saying is this is their policy. They urge lawmakers in the state level and federal to base their legislation on data rather than anecdote, rather than media, rather than fear. Let's base all your legislation on facts. So I'm very glad. I think this is very timely. I think with all the media attention that has been, for the most part, negative, that it was the right time for ASRM to bring this out. So happy about that. If you want to look at it, you can go to asrm.org and take a look at the policy. Now we switch somewhere to the world. I and most of my colleagues do represent people all around the world. And I know agencies, IVF clinics, whoever you are, you definitely work with people all over the world. As we know, China forbids surrogacy. It is illegal. But there was recently a couple from Hong Kong who did their surrogacy in China. And then they petitioned the High Court. You have to petition the High Court in Hong Kong. Even if you do a surrogacy here in the United States and you get a judgment, just like the UK. Doesn't matter what the judgment says here. They still have to do it in the UK. They have to go through the High Court in Hong Kong. And the High Court did give them parentage. Again, they looked at, obviously, you're the parents. This is your child. Hong Kong did say, this is a one-off. We're not making a law. This is not for everybody. However, though, what if there are other people? I have to assume there are other people. What are they going to say? No, we gave you parentage, but we're not going to give you parentage. Obviously, I'm not a fan of anything that goes underground. There's no safeguards. There's no safety net. That's where you get bad actors. Well, a lot of bad actors, let's just say that and leave it at that. However, what Hong Kong said and what I keep in mind and what most of the people in this industry keep in mind is there's a child involved, and that child has very real parents. That child needs citizenship. That child needs stability, right? So that's what the court said. So I'm very glad about that. And then similar to this, a man in New Zealand, I can talk. Actually, I only had like 4 hours of sleep last night. OMG, I usually sleep well. I know, just a little aside, but it happens. Anyway, so this man in New Zealand went to Georgia, not the state in the United States, but the country, and he had a friend pretend he was his girlfriend because in Georgia, you need 2 people, a man and a woman, to do surrogacy. So that's the thing about Georgia. It has to be through heterosexual relationship. And then they broke up because she wasn't an intended parent. She never wanted to be an intended parent. He wanted to be an intended parent. He wanted to go to Georgia. There are other low-cost options that he could have gone to, but that's fine. New Zealand did grant him the adoption order in New Zealand. If you do your surrogacy here or wherever, you still have to do a process and that you do adopt, right? The judge was not happy about his deception. But again, what the judge took into consideration was the child. And this was his child. and he wanted to parent. So while the judge was uncomfortable, he said the child would be left stateless, child wouldn't have a parent, and that's what not that judges aren't in the business of doing this. But if he just had reached out to me, I would have been able to tell him that that's not what you want to do. All right. And then staying sort of not in New Zealand, but now we're going to Finland. Okay, so back in 2007, Finland actually started talking about donors conceived children and allowing them access to their records. And so the adults now turned 18, they now get access to their records. So that's something that donor conceived children, for the most part, a lot of them do want. There's some that don't. I've been to conferences and they've had children born via sperm and or egg donation, and some kids go, well, these are my parents, I don't really care. And some people really want to know, right? So the children in Finland who are born via donor definitely now get access when they turn 18 to their records. So that's something that Finland has done. As we all know, when I started in this business 20 years ago, we did anonymous egg donation. We even said even then, there's nothing like anonymity. I mean, Google was around, if you really wanted to find somebody. I did have some cases where some parents did some extra digging. If you really wanted to find somebody, you could, but now with 23andMe and Ancestry.com, it is incredibly easy. So we always tell our clients that there is no such thing as anonymity, especially today. But that's good news for the children of Finland who definitely do want to find out their genetic identity, right? Also in the UK, they're very strict regarding ads. I don't know if any agencies here do advertising or any IVF clinics do advertising for donors, but you cannot make it big and bold. They have restrictions on what they can pay. It's typically expensive. It's not expensive, it's expenses. So this one clinic decided to do a really nice ad and kind of really make their 985 pounds big and bold. And the organization called the Human Fertilization and Embryology Authority said no. That was a little too salesy and you need to tone it down. So they agreed. So if you advertise anywhere in the UK, remember that it's expenses, not compensation, and you need to respect their rules and really look at it, right? So now let me talk about the Dutch IPs, and this is really for attorneys and agencies who deal with the Dutch. I do. I have a lot of Dutch IPs. If they are same-sex, particularly, there are two pathways that they can do, right? So if they are working with a same sex, oh no, if they're same sex and they're working with a single surrogate, if they place the surrogate's name on the birth certificate initially and the bio dad, it is an easier process. When they go back home, their child is immediately Dutch, so they can get the card, the nationality card, the medical care, all the things that you get being a Dutch citizen, which probably is a lot, speaking from an American point of view. The issue is, I can do this in California. I've done it for years. I don't really need to do it anymore for my French, but I did it all the time for the French intended parents. Bio dad, surrogate, took her off. We did not give her legal parentage. We just said we're placing her name, and we removed her name almost immediately, right? So no parentage. She doesn't want to be a parent. Remember, we've talked about this. So true. So just make sure that in the county and in the state, because I think there's one county now in California that may be tough to do that, that you can do this. So I'm working on a case right now, and while it has been done in that state, the state is run very specifically. Even if one county is good, one judge can have their own rules, right? I experienced this recently in the state that I'm working at. So just keep that in mind that you really need to know not only the state, the county, but the judge. So just keep that in mind. If you're an agency, talk to an attorney, figure out where the surrogate is, what's the process going to be. I'm sure I'm going to be fine. I've put, all the reasons behind it, why they need this. We're not giving her parental rights. The surrogate has agreed to this, right? The easier option, of course, is to put the two intended parents on the birth certificate. However, if you do that, when they go back to the Netherlands, it is a year-long adoption process. So I get it. Do more work up front, and then, they go home and it's a much simpler process. So I'm happy to do that. Just keep in mind that, wherever they're at, can you do that in Michigan? Can you do that in Missouri? You have to work not only with the court, but you have to also work with vital records, right? A lot of times you can get a judgment in California, but just because you get a judgment in California, can I get that through in that state? Can I do that in Florida? Well, we're not really doing a lot in Florida right now. Just a pause for a few more weeks and we'll see what happens, right? But again, right? Like, can I do that in the state? Not only with the court, but with vital records, right? So just definitely keep that in mind when you're working with the Dutch, right? And especially if there's a same-sex couple, right? And then in Ireland, staying kind of across the pond, so to speak, lesbians do have to do something similar to what they do, like in Florida. We talked about that sperm donor case and how the sperm donor could get, um, you know, some parental rights because they didn't go through a doctor. In Ireland, it's similar, I'm sure it's for the same reasons to cut off the rights of the sperm donor, but the women do have to go through a physician. And I get it, that, it's clinical. I mean, I did so many IVF procedures and IUIs. I get it. You've got the gown, your metal, lights, doctors, nurses. It's not romantic. It's not fun. It's the opposite of intimate. But if you really want the security in Ireland, you want to cut off the parental rights, you and your partner want to have full parental rights, you have to work with a doctor. In Florida, it's the same way. The women did have parental rights, but because the sperm donor they didn't do a sperm donor through a doctor, they didn't cut off his rights. In California, you no longer have to work with a physician, but please, for the love of God, have a contract in writing because that will protect you if you do a home insemination, right? So, every state, every country is different. Research your laws, talk to a reproductive attorney before you proceed. We always say that, when I'm working with anybody overseas, for the most part, except for China, it's difficult to talk to an attorney, but Hong Kong you can. You speak to an attorney first. Figure out, can I do this? What should I do? Dot my I's, cross my T's, right? And then there's been some posthumous cases coming out of Israel, which is not surprising considering the war. I have been involved in posthumous reproduction. It's very sensitive, obviously. You've got people that are grieving. You want to work with a team that's very empathetic and understanding when you do that. Your mental health professionals, your IVF physician, your agency, your attorneys. It's definitely, every case is different. Every case is difficult. We've got people that have been trying for a long time. This case and these cases do add an extra layer of sensitivity to them. So what happened because of the war, the Israeli government repealed you used to have a court order to get sperm from somebody who has died, and they removed that because of the war, and so they've made the process much easier. And I think there's 250 cases of posthumous reproduction, and so there actually has been at least one baby born. It's a very tough situation in Israel, and I think they're just trying to make a bad situation. I don't, a baby is a baby. A baby's a good thing. So I'm happy that a baby's born, especially if the person who died wanted children. So, best of luck to them. But if you're involved in these cases, again, they're rare, just like IVF mix-ups. They don't happen a lot, but just keep in mind the sensitivity, right? All right, back to the United States. We haven't really talked about this case. It's been all over the news. It's the Mark surrogacy case. If you're in our industry and you haven't heard of it, you're living under a rock. It is an anomaly. There was a recent very good article, very long, just to let you know. It felt like a small novella, but I think the one of the most balanced articles about this case. I think it's the New Yorker. And so if you want to read a more balanced article, read that one. It's the longest, but I think it's the best. Anyways, I know the intended parents have gone after and sued some of the surrogates for breach of contract. The surrogates didn't know what to do when they found out that they were pregnant, and they were like their 23rd surrogate. I think they have like the children are all under 5 and they're over 20 children. Anyways, this surrogate out of Texas is actually going after the intended parents because they said, you duped me. You lied to me. It's a fraud. You said you were intended parents. You never told me you owned the surrogacy. The surrogacy agency. You never told me that you had multiple surrogates. You had over 20 surrogates. You never told me how many children. You said you had one child. So she's going after them for fraud. Now she's suing them for $100 million. I don't think she'll get that, but good for her because surrogates do this to give somebody a baby. They really believe, like, I've tried for years. I mean, in my case, I tried for over 7 years, right? I didn't have children. I wasn't lying. The woman who gave me my children knew I desperately wanted children. And when surrogates carry and create this baby for 9 months, they want to know because they are tied to that child because of how they've carried them, that they're giving that baby to a good home, not to somebody who has 20 plus children. So, good for her for doing this. And I hope she recovers well because these surrogates and what they've gone through is appalling. And this case, again, is an outlier and it never should have been allowed to happen. According to all the news reports I've read, the attorneys knew. I think they spread their IVF treatment around multiple IVF centers, but you know, got to call out bad actors, and that agency and those people are bad actors, and they should never been allowed to do that. So. This surrogate is in Nevada, and there was a recent Nevada clinic that closed, and they left parents 3 days to get their genetic material. I had one client, I need to follow up and see if she knows about this, who, has, I don't think she has any more genetic material, sperm, eggs, embryos, right? It's Nevada Fertility Institute in Las Vegas. Apparently, as a female physician, forgot her name. She owes almost $160,000 in back rent. So hopefully everybody's got their embryos and their sperm and their eggs, and they've moved out. It's a very unfortunate situation. You know, I have to say, there's so many clinics, like there's so many attorneys, like there's so many agencies. I think just ask everybody, ask multiple attorneys, ask, other IVF centers, ask around. I know physicians can be kind of closed and they don't want to talk about a physician in a negative way. But I think the time has come that you might want to, particularly since we're going back to Lane Fertility. I talked about it last time. It's that clinic in Northern California and Nevada. It is run by Danielle Lane. Egg donors are suing her because she did not pay her. Look her up. There's lots of information on her. I recently had to tell one magazine because they posted a little blurb about her as one of the, 8 people to watch in 2026. And I said, are you kidding me right now? Did you not do your due diligence? Look at what she's done. Okay, they took her little section off, but Google, my friends, Google. It's there. Use it. So the egg donors are suing her, and the employees have joined. Apparently, she's not paying her employees her salary. What else is she not paying? I don't even want to think about it. I know she's being sued. I know anybody can be sued for anything, anytime in the United States. But really and truly, something needs to be happen to be happened. Something needs to happen with her medical license. Some little note, something. Because if you go her medical license, nothing says that she has any, disciplinary action against her. It shows nothing. She still continues to operate, and she is active on social media. Oh my gosh. Any ideas on what to do? Find me on socials, call me, email. I know a great attorney that has represented the egg donors. Maybe I should have him on here. Oh, that's a good idea. I was thinking about that last night when I could not sleep. So maybe I'll have him on for the next one. Anyways, or a podcast, right? And we can talk about all the things because he would be a great person to talk to. So that's it with her. Hopefully, she loses her license as she should. And as we've been talking about surrogacy, and we know that, like I said, either last time or the time before, there was a report that was sent to the United Nations that said that surrogacy is violence against women. There has been a recent article that pointed out that that report did not base their data on any research, any medical experts. They ignored peer-reviewed data. They relied on biased sources. It contradicts findings that show positive outcomes for most families. As I talked about, there was a longitudinal study. Love that word, not gonna lie. I worked for a publisher, and they published a lot of statistics books for PhDs. Oh my gosh, it's insane. I'm an English lit major. I'm like, what is that? Anyways, that's a fancy way for saying a long-term study. 20 years at the psychological outcomes for surrogates, and surrogates were fine, right? The children were fine, the surrogates were fine. There's a slight uptick in physical risks. Obviously, years ago, before all the testing became what it is today, there were way more multiples, way more. Do you like the way I said that? But there were more multiples. Double embryo transfer. We were having twins and triplets. Now it's single embryo transfer. Anyways, but for the most part, slight uptick in physical risk, but not to what that report says. So they said, not a blanket ban, because if you have a blanket ban, you have what you have in China, which is underground. And when surrogacy becomes underground, it is not safe. It's not safe for the people that work with the surrogates. It's not safe for the surrogates. It's not safe for anybody. And yes, I know we've talked about some bad actors, but for the most part, as that article said, marked surrogacy is not the norm. The norm is people who are wanting children and the surrogates who carry for those people. So a ban is not what's needed. Informed, like the ASRM says, legislation based on data, based on facts, which is why I'm happy to report Mexico City. Oh my gosh. I think because of what's been happening, and then they've looked at the data, they have decided in Mexico City only, not Mexico, the country, just the Mexico City, that no longer you have to go through what's called an amparo trial. That was a civil trial, not in family court, civil court. And sometimes the parents couldn't leave for 3 to 4 months, which is a lot. I know we all work from home, but staying in a foreign country, as great as the food is, because the food is pretty fabulous, and the weather for the most part is great, it's still not your home, right? As I tell all my people who say, well, they're going to get a passport, my clients want a passport because they can leave home quickly. It doesn't matter if their child is United States and they live in, Finland, the Netherlands, Norway, right? So Mexico City decided, because there were two cases against and a case for, and courts don't like when there is, um, different opinions. So the Supreme Court said, no, we cannot have two or three different opinions. Let's resolve this once and for all. So what they said is, it's fine. You can go through an administrative process. You no longer need the amparo trial. You need a contract, two attorneys, right? So you need that, but you no longer need the long-term amparo trial. That's fabulous news. I love that out of Mexico City. I hope the other jurisdictions that you do surrogacy out of will follow suit and they will give you an option. Obviously, if you want to go through a trial, you can. Technically, in the United States, it's a trial, but it's uncontested. Nobody is fighting. The surrogate says, nope, don't want to be the mom. And the parents go, yes, I want to be the mom. I want to be the dad. I want to be the mom, mom, dad, dad, whatever you are, right? So that's great news out of Mexico City. And like I said, I hope the other jurisdictions follow suit, right? So let's see. Oh my gosh. We all know that fertility is declining, right? Not declining, but people aren't having babies. Recently, there was a report that said that single women in their 40s are having more IVF and more children. They don't have a partner, they're 40, time is running out. So they're starting to have more children via IVF. So they're one of the biggest utilizers of IVF, by the way. So France decides that they're going to email or send a letter to all 29-year-olds because at 29 years old, you can freeze your eggs. So they sent a letter. You can imagine how well it went over. My children are 25. I can imagine them getting a letter from the government saying, hey, want to freeze your eggs? Actually, anyways, I digress. So it did not go very well. It did not help with the fertility issue in France. The women were like, what are you doing? Why are you sending me this? This is intrusive. If I want to freeze my eggs, if I want to have a child, that's my choice, not yours. Again, you might want to read the room, France. I know that you want more babies. The whole world wants more babies. We got to think of a better way than emailing 25, 20, and 29-year-old women, right? And then China, oh my gosh, China did a condom tax because they figured if they charged more for condoms, people wouldn't use condoms and then they'd, oops, have a baby. Again, it didn't go well. And I know China really has a very serious fertility problem. Part of it was the one child ban, and that they let you have two children, and now I think they're up to three. So they've got a really big issue there, but charging more for condoms is not it, China. Okay, so um, again, you gotta read the room and you know do something else to get people to have more children. I would say make it more affordable and let's help young people get better jobs, get better health care, be able to afford a house, make it more affordable for our young people, and they'll probably have more children. Just a thought. Okay, so I have learned so much. I know I'm pivoting on women being pregnant. No mystery. I got pregnant, but I never got out of my first trimester, so I don't know what the second, third trimester is. But there's a fourth trimester. It should not come to any surprise, but as somebody who never gave birth, I was pretty surprised. And now we're starting to talk about it because there's so many things that happen after you give birth. Duh. I mean, really, it shouldn't be a surprise, but duh. So it's called the fourth trimester. Hormones are changing. Your body's trying to regulate to what it was before you got pregnant. Your uterus is shrinking, all the things that are happening. And it's called the fourth trimester. Well, now people are talking about the zero trimester. And I'm sure there's going to be zero trimester coaches because it's the United States and zero trimester influencers. So just look for that. I'm sure the rest of the world will follow suit. Doctors say, yes, there is something to be said for that, right? But really what they say is folic acid, right? So start taking folic acid. If you smoke, stop smoking. If you stop using, if you utilize marijuana, it's legal here, right? You might want to stop that. If you drink, wine every night, a glass of white wine, just cut that back. All right. So, you don't need a zero trimester coach. I guess if you want one, you could hire one, but you know, just, check with your doctor and do those things. And, if you need to lose some weight, get healthy, right? But I guess this is zero trimester. What are we going to do? -1? Who knows? Anyways, I got a little chuckle out of that. So I'm going to end on a high note. I have one more thing after this to talk about, but surrogacy myths. I don't think I talked about this last time. If I did, I'm sorry. But if you're new, you didn't hear it, right? Okay, myth number one, we've all heard this. The rapporteur report to the UN said this. The surrogate is the real mother. Oh my gosh, just talk to surrogates. No, they are not the real mother. It's gestational surrogacy that we do. Yes, I do about one genetic surrogacy a case a year at that, but it's gestational surrogacy. Surrogate is not the mother. She never wanted to be the mother. The intended parents are the parents. Okay, full stop. So look at the data, people, right? Just look at the data. ASRM and that response to the report said, make it fact and data driven. Myth number two, the surrogate can change their mind and keep the baby. That's part of the new Florida legislation amendment that we're all trying to prevent because the surrogate does not want to change her mind and she does not want to keep the baby. When I represent surrogates, they're like, excuse me, where's the paperwork? It's late. Stephanie, can I have it? Where do I sign? Right? So she doesn't want to keep the baby. It's not her baby. Myth number three, surrogate is exploited and she's taken advantage of. Talk to surrogates. They make informed decisions. It's voluntary. They raise their hand. They do their research. They talk to other surrogates. They meet with a medical professional. They meet with a psychologist. They have their own attorney. They are not taken advantage of. They are strong women. Oh my gosh, I have this one surrogate in Oklahoma. Love her. Love all my surrogates. These women, smart, tough, read their contract, definitely know what they're doing. They're not taken advantage of. They raise their hand. They're wonderful, amazing women. They gave me my children. So surrogacy causes long-term depression for the carrier. I talked about the study. It does not. Surrogates are fine. No long-term depression. There was a longitudinal study. Oh my gosh, I got to say that again. 20 years, they're fine. Surrogacy isn't affordable for the average family. It's $150,000 to $200,000. It's affordable-ish. Yes, get loans. That's what I did. There's grants that you can get. I think I mentioned the grants last time. So there's grants that you can get. Definitely people have borrowed from their family members. So yes, you don't have to be ultra wealthy to do it. I certainly wasn't, but it was a long time ago. So anyways, children born via surrogacy face stigma or identity issues. Myth number 6, my children are my children. They've lived their life. They've never been stigmatized for what they go through. So obviously we're talking about this country. I'm sure, maybe other countries it might be different, and I know it is. But for the most part, children have great identity issues. I know some children in France born via surrogacy, happy, healthy, well-adjusted. And myth number 7, intended parents won't bond with the baby. And they do. They bond just fine just because they haven't carried the child. So let's put away all those myths. Let's start talking about facts and evidence. Okay, so I want to leave you with an IVF mix-up case. I know you're thinking, really, Stephanie? Another bad case, but it's on the Daily, which is the New York Times podcast, and it was absolutely beautiful. Woman delivers a baby, realizes it's not their baby because the baby doesn't look like them. They do DNA. Husband isn't connected. Mother isn't connected. And so they contact the IVF physician. I'm sure this office handled it a bit differently than the one in Florida because this couple did not sue. They kept good records. They figured out that somebody else carried their baby, and that baby was also a girl. So, of course, they got attorneys together and they met, and then they got a plan to put their babies with their rightful parents, which was gut-wrenching for them because they had bonded with these children. I think the children were over 6 months old when they finally, figured this out, got the testing, got everything together. And they also had each an older sibling. And they did the process slowly, and they finally just cut the cord. They said, we can't do this anymore. We just need to switch. And 2 years later or 4 years later, they're still friends. And the older siblings are friends, and the babies that were um, developed and gestated in the opposite wombs are good friends too. So it's a beautiful story, and what a wonderful ending, and what a way to make what could have been an awful situation absolutely beautiful. So I urge you to listen to that because it's heartwarming, and it's people making something that happened that could be and was awful into something beautiful. And with that, thank you. Oh my gosh, this lasted so long, but I was late. All right. Thank you for joining. Are there any questions? I have to look. I don't see any questions. Thank you so much for joining. Find me on all the socials. And if you have any questions, let me know. But you guys have been the best.